Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers. Or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks to 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or are looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My Angular Story. This week we're talking to James Shore. James, do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone.
Now, you were on episode 205. We talked about Agile Fluency and the Agile Fluency Project. Do you want to give us just a little bit more of an introduction?
Sure. My name is James Shore, obviously. I have been involved in the software industry since 1991, and I've been working with Agile methods since 1999. I wrote a book called The Art of Agile Development, which is about 10 years old now and really needs to be updated. But actually, I wrote it to be fairly evergreen, so it doesn't have a lot of specific technologies, so it's still fairly current.
Well, cool. And it's interesting. I've been doing software development for about 12 years. And I remember getting in, and I think that's when the Agile development movement really was starting to just get really, really hot. We had a lot of I don't want to say new, but we had a lot of methodologies coming out or getting refined. It seems like extreme programming had been out for a while. And so it was interesting just to kind of get that feel for where things were and oh, wow, this is such a better way of doing things. And it feels like we've kind of gone away from that now. So
yeah, I think we have.
I don't know what people are doing now, but
it's interesting. So 12 years ago, it would have been about 2006.
Yeah.
And yeah, it definitely feels like things have taken a step backwards. In the 2000s, there was a lot of energy around doing software really well. And now these days it seems, and it was sort of a programmer-led movement that was starting to go away in 2006. But now it really feels like it's turned into this bureaucracy, this project management burden, rather than really being a tool for programmers to do great work. And I find that kind of depressing, to be honest.
Well, to me, it feels, it feels bureaucratic and things like that, like you're saying. But the thing that I find ironic is that is really the antithesis of what Agile development was. And so
it really is. Agile was designed as a way of getting away from this sort of dehumanizing programmers are plug replaceable parts that was prevalent in software development in the 90s. And it seems like we're going back to that, or at least going back to a perspective where excellence is no longer the priority. Excellence in your craft, so to speak.
Yeah, well, and that speaks a lot to the software craftsmanship movement that also was kind of crested around that time as well.
Yeah, well, that'd be Bob Marten, and he was heavily involved in the extreme programming movement.
Yeah.
And I suspect, although you'd have to ask him, I suspect that the software craftsmanship movement was his sort of attempt to hold on to that feeling of excellence that was part of extreme programming in the early days, when the project management sort of wing of things kind of started taking over in the late 2000s. He was trying to bring that back. But I think that was a mistake, to be honest, because one of the brilliant things about the Agile movement was that it was about bringing together all disciplines into a unified team, not just having a programmer side and a project management side, but actually having programmers talk directly to their users and their customers, and so they could better understand what to build.
Yeah, 100%. This show is kind of a walk back through your story and your story getting into development. And so I think what might be useful just to kind of get to some of these points is to talk about how you got into this stuff. So let's back up and talk about how you got into programming, and then we can kind of go ahead from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was always fascinated with programming. I got started, I don't even know how long ago. When I was a kid, when I was 10 or 11, my parents sent me to a computer camp, and I brought home a Timex Sinclair 1000. Have you ever seen this thing?
I'm not sure. My grandpa, when I was a kid, and I grew up in the 80s, he came home with a whole bunch of different little machines. So I may have seen one or something like it, but yeah.
Yeah. The Timex Sinclair was a tiny little plastic box. It was about the size of a moleskin notebook, so 8 inches by 5 inches,
Mm-hmm.
and it had this membrane keyboard that didn't even have proper buttons, but it was more like a really cheap calculator. And you sort of push down on the membrane, and it would put a character on. It had a whopping 2K of memory. And
Wow, that was a ton back then.
yeah, I remember I got a 16K RAM pack expansion, and it was the best thing ever. So yeah, that's really how I got involved in programming.
You must have been rich.
There, no, no. And then later on, I got a Trash 80, TRS 80, color computer, Coco, and then an Apple II. So I had programming in my blood, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I remember when color computer was a meaningful distinction.
Yeah. Well, of course, this Timex Sinclair, you plugged these computers into your TV, right? You used a little switch box that you plugged in. Of course, there was no cable to plug into. You literally disconnected the antenna from the back of the TV, plugged in this switch box, and then reconnected the antenna to the switch box, and you could switch back and forth between computer and antenna. So the Timex and the Coco would plug into this thing, and I had a black and white TV, which didn't matter because all the Timex could do was black and white anyway.
Right.
So yeah, I that's how I got involved, is on this little Timex machine, trying to make my programs fit into 2K of memory, and then eventually went to school, took a detour studying electrical engineering, which turns out to be really freaking hard, and turns out you have to understand quantum physics, which I don't. So that didn't work out. But I ended up in computer science, and then as a programmer eventually.
That's funny. Yeah, I was an electrical engineering major, and then I switched to computer engineering major, which is kind of spans the gap between electrical engineering and computer science. But it's still much more an engineering discipline. So
yeah, that's what I was studying. I was just studying electronic engineering, which probably would be computer engineering in another school, or not power electrical engineering, but circuits and digital and chips and so forth.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of the direction we went. And if you've been in the industry since 2001, you are a little bit older than I am, so it's probably pretty close to the same thing.
Yeah. Actually, I got started. My first job was in 1994, so it's so I go back even a little further than that. Nice. And then I got hired out of school based on some stuff I wrote on Fido Net. You ever heard of Fido Net? Yes,
I have, but I don't recall what exactly it was.
Fido Net was this sort of early online forum thing that people, it's sort of like Usenet news groups, which for those of you listening who've never even heard of that, it's basically online bulletin, web forums, except it was all done via telephone dial-up. These BBS operators, these basically hobbyists running this out of their homes, would make long distance calls to other BBSs and exchange mail packets all over the world. And so it was a way of having chat forums. So one of them was about basic programming, which is what I did. And I was posting a lot there and sharing my thoughts, and somebody hired me because they needed a basic programmer and saw the stuff I wrote on Fido Net.
Nice. You were famous when the internet was small.
Well, I would not think I was famous, but I was definitely attracted to the attention of somebody in my hometown, which is Portland, Oregon, and got me hired, which sort of what launched my career. You know how it is. Once you have some experience, it doesn't matter what your degree is or anything else. It's just have you done this before?
Well,
so
and
that got me going.
It's funny too, because I've been working on a book on how to find a job and things like that. And, this is right in line with what I'm telling people is like, look, they're not hiring you because you came in and wowed them with your prowess at programming. It's because they freaking know you can solve the problem.
That's right. Exactly.
And they saw this on Fido Net, not much different now, like you said, from posting it to a forum or on your blog. Somebody finds it. Oh, this person knows what they're doing. And look, they want somebody to hire them. I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even post that I was looking for a job. They just contacted me and say, we're looking for somebody. I got very, very lucky, I think. And I actually still don't know to this day what it was that I had posted that attracted their attention. But there you go.
Yeah. So what kinds of programming have you done? Because I know you're not an Angular expert. We brought you on to talk about Agile development. But yeah, what's your journey look like, and how did you find your way into Agile development?
Well, that first job was programming BASIC. There was back in 1994, which is when this happened. Microsoft had what they called Professional Development System BASIC, PDS BASIC, which was a real compiled language that you could use to make shipping software. And I was hired by a very boring company that did point of sale software for automotive glass repair shops, and their software was written in BASIC. And then from there, I got hired. I don't even remember the order, but I got hired to write some C++ and C at Intel. This was kind of interesting. I don't know if it was because of my electrical engineering background or just got lucky, but I was hired by a team at Intel doing one of the chipsets for the computers.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this crazy idea, which we've seen before in the computer industry. And if with more experience, I would have told them what a dumb idea it was. They were going to automatically translate their design documents into the source code used to design their chips, so they hired me writing that software to do that translation from FrameMaker documents, compiling that down into what's called VHDL, Basic Hardware Description Language, which then they would interpret in a simulator and then actually somehow convert into something that would tape out and be put on the chips. Then later on, I got involved with Java, or maybe that came first, and C#. I've always, other than that brief experience with C++, I've always stayed with the more garbage collected sort of web side languages, and I enjoy working with them a lot more. I've dabbled in Ruby a little bit, and of course, because I did a lot of work in web-based applications, doing Java, and coming up into the late 90s, 2000s, of course, being able to program in the web was the big deal, and it still is. The web is, basically taken over the hardware, taken over the application world. It was really important to understand how to program on the front end. So I learned JavaScript as well. And then about 6 years ago, I had a Kickstarter to launch a screencast about how to do test-driven development in JavaScript. Because at the time, there wasn't a lot of work, a lot of knowledge about how to really do Agile development with JavaScript well. And so I had done a little bit with that, and I wanted to launch this screencast to explore it further and to really share what I knew, but also learn new things. And that was modestly successful, a lot more successful than I expected it to be. And that turned into a long-running 5-year screencast where I explored all kinds of things in JavaScript, testing JavaScript, including Angular and React and Ember and other technologies.
Nice. So where in all of this did you run across the idea of Agile development, and how did that affect some of these other things? Because I know, for example, TDD and extreme programming kind of go hand in hand. Some of these other ideas connect. So
I had this really formative experience as a teenager because, I was programming throughout my teens. And I had this experience where I was working on a really complicated program for me. It was a D&D character builder. And it was the most, as you do. I still play Dungeons and Dragons to this day. I get together with friends every Wednesday night and we play D&D in my basement. So I don't know.
Nerd. I get together with my brothers and sisters and play D&D. So
it's a lot of fun. It's a great way to socialize. There's a lot more beer involved than when I was a teenager, which is probably a good thing. So I was building this character thing, and it was written in BASIC. It was written in a version of BASIC that only had line numbers and go-to statements and go subs. And it was the most complicated program I ever built at that point. And there was a moment where I literally went from having this whole thing in my head to not understanding it at all. And it just sort of all disappeared out from under me. And I could no longer remember what stood for what or what line number did what. And the program collapsed. And that, to me, was really transformative because it said to me that the hard part in writing software of any node is not in writing the algorithms, but in understanding how it all fits together. It's design. And being able to communicate that design. And then as I worked on teams and so forth, I realized it's not just what you can understand yourself, but how you can communicate that design to other people so they can understand how this all fits together as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really interested in software process and structured languages and various object-oriented programming, all these different ways of working well together as a team to build software. And in the late 90s, the known best way to do that was waterfall development or phase gate development.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always really promoting doing that, to the utmost degree, like really doing it by the book. And I got hired onto a team where they were doing it really by the book. They had use cases and they had a giant printer, a plotter that was, 6 feet wide and could make these huge wall charts. And they used a tool called Rational Rows. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Rational Rows. So in the late 90s, there was this big movement for things called CASE tools, computer-aided software engineering. And you don't hear about this anymore because it was an absolute flop. It was a fad and people used it, but it didn't work. But the idea was that you would draw diagrams, UML diagrams. UML is Unified Markup Language. You draw these diagrams in a tool like you're using AutoCAD or some other drafting tool, and it would automatically generate your software for you. And so Rational Rows was the big one of these tools. It had this notable feature where if you renamed, when you generated code, it would delete comments that were outside of methods as being extraneous.
Mm-hmm.
But if you in the tool renamed a method, it would comment out the old method. And then if you ran it again, it would delete the method because it was comments. And it used a giant binary format, so you couldn't work with somebody else in the same part of the program at the same time if you were working on the same diagram. It was terrible. Anyway, they were using Rational Rows. They had diagrams on the wall. They were doing waterfall exactly by the book, and it was the worst software development experience I ever had. I realized from this that all the experiences I had from waterfall development had worked despite the processes, not because of them.
Oh, wow. That's quite the realization to come to.
Yeah.
The quote-unquote right way to do it is at best incidental to actually getting it done.
It was actually actively harmful to getting it done. As I looked back, I saw that the closer we hewed to the known good way, that the thing that people had written massive numbers of books about, the closer we had hewed to that approach to developing, the worse the projects had gone. So it was kind of a crisis of faith because I had really bought into these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started looking around for other things, and I ran into this book because I was still very much into this idea of computer-aided software engineering and modeling. But Rational Rows was a disaster. So, and the replacement that we had found called Together J, which would automatically create the diagrams from source code as well as go back the other way, it was what called round-trip engineering.
Mm-hmm.
That was very cool, but ultimately not actually very useful. So I found this book by Peter Coad, I don't remember how to pronounce his name, called Modeling in Color. And it was about, how to design a project using colors to define different parts of the application or different components of your design. And that didn't really go anywhere, but tucked in the middle of this book was a little thin chapter on something called feature-driven development. And feature-driven development was an agile method. It talked about shipping, talking to your customers to find out what they want, doing it in the order of priority that they said, showing them the work every month, and having this various ways of demonstrating progress.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was hired in to lead a team at Novell. And I said, hey, let's use this feature-driven development approach. And one of the people on that team said, I've heard of something called extreme programming. They're talking about it in Ward's Wiki. And I said, extreme what? He said, yeah, extreme programming. I said, that is a stupid name. And we were already doing this feature-driven development thing, so let's just skip that. But I started checking it out, and I checked out the C2.com wiki, Ward Cunningham's wiki, original wiki web, and they were talking about some very interesting things, like pair programming, which I thought was silly, and incremental evolutionary design, which I also thought was silly, and test-driven development, which sounded interesting, and all these other ideas. And so when that project ended, I was hired to do another project using Perl for various things. And I thought to myself, well, let me try this test-driven development thing, see how well it actually works. And it worked really well. It helped that I was using Perl to parse websites to extract, I think it was weather information. It was just basically screen scraping software, which is basically the perfect use case for test-driven development. So it worked really well for that. And Novell brought me in to do some more work with them. And I said, let's try XP. Let's try all of it, even this silly pair programming thing. And we tried it and it worked. The more I did it by the book, the better it worked, which was exactly the opposite of my previous experience. So I was hooked.
That's awesome.
Then after that, Novell was so happy with the results of that, they had me work with their team there to help them rewrite a bunch of Perl software in Java and use extreme programming for that. That was one of the best work experiences of my life. After that, I wanted to keep working with extreme programming, but I couldn't find anybody else this was 2000, 2001 at this point. I couldn't find anybody else who was working in this way. So I realized that in order to keep doing this, I'd have to teach people how to do it. And that's how I became a Agile software development consultant.
Gotcha. It's just so interesting to me. I mean, we focus so much, I think, on the technology, and then we fail to give proper attention to the other things that go into it. You know, the people things and the process things and the automation things and the operational things. And instead we just focus on, what's the next silver bullet that's going to make the technology easier? And it's easy to overlook all this other stuff, especially if you have people that naturally work well together and they can sort of somewhat organically come up with systems that will work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much silver bullet thinking in the industry, and
not just in this industry.
Yeah, it's true. But especially, I think, amongst programmers, this real desire that all of our problems should be able to be solved by technology, right? If we've got a problem, it's because we're missing a tool. And if we get a tool, that solves all of our problems. But ultimately, I think the really hard problems in software development are about communication. And that original, insight I had in my teens when I realized that design, how we communicate with each other, is the really important thing about software development. That was true. I mean, there's more to it than that. It's not just design; it's how we communicate with each other about everything.
Right.
But ultimately, the computer doesn't care. And if all that mattered was the computer, we'd just still be using ones and zeros. But we use programming languages and we use tools like Git because they make it easier for us to collaborate. And the collaboration and figuring out how to do that well, that's the real trick. That's the real challenge. But it can't just be something that a Scrum Master or a project manager does for you. You can't just communicate and not understand the technology either. You have to have both. And that's what I think software development world still lacks today.
Yeah, it's funny. My brother is going through a computer science program right now. And he basically said, "Okay, I'm learning all these things." And then he listed off a whole bunch of like subtopics to the courses he was in. And I only recognized about 3 of them. I'm not sure if that's a good thing for him or a bad thing for me, but
yeah, I know the feeling.
Anyway, so, but I just looked at him and I said, I don't know if I may have inadvertently used some of those things. He's like, well, then what's the biggest thing for me to learn? And I looked at him and I said, look, when I started doing web development, you could almost get away with having 1 or maybe 2 people build something. And because they were simple, it wasn't because, of anything else, right? The tools were that great. Now they're not. It's the other way around. We have much better ways of doing things now than we did, 12 years ago. But the difference was that what people envisioned for their web applications were a lot simpler. They were a lot simpler. I mean, now we're looking at things and going, oh, we could build something like Facebook or something like this or that, or, Amazon. And so I said, because software has gotten so much more complicated, you need a lot more people involved to make it work. And so the best thing you can learn to do is communicate with other people. Because if you can't communicate with other people, you can't build those kinds of applications today.
That's absolutely right. And not only that, it used to be that one team could solve a problem, but now we've got multiple teams working on the same product.
Yes.
And that brings out a whole nother scale of challenge. A big thing in the Agile movement these days is large-scale Agile. And for some people, what that means is how can we water down these ideas so they're unthreatening to my enterprise bosses, which, That's a whole nother thing. And the answer is don't do that. Do something else. I mean, for God's sake, just stop.
Yeah.
But there is this a true large scale agile, which is something that I do work with companies on, which is about interdependent teams. How do you get multiple teams that are working on the same product and are dependent on each other to get their work done? How do you coordinate their work so that they can be successful?
Yeah, it's funny too, because I've been listening to this podcast. It's called the MFCEO, and MF stands for, the naughty words, I guess.
The obvious.
It stands for. I try and keep a clean rating, so I'm not going to say the actual words. But anyway, they did a quote by Margaret Thatcher, and I think this boils down to part of the problem that we have with this kind of thing is that nobody wants to dictate this is how we work, or nobody wants to sit down and say, all right, let's talk about these things, because they don't want to stand up and cause a fight. And anyway, Margaret Thatcher said, and I had to go look up the quote, but she says, consensus, the process of abandoning all beliefs, principles, values, and policies in search of something in which no one believes, but to which no one objects. The process of avoiding the very issues that have to be solved merely because you cannot get agreement on the way ahead. What great cause would have been fought and won under the banner of I stand for consensus? And I think that's what this is, right? The thing that's really interesting is if you're really being diligent about implementing Agile, in my experience anyway, what I tend to find is that you're essentially forcing the communication and pushing people to be honest so that you can reach some level of consensus, but it's not by abandoning any beliefs or principles. You're setting up the organization with the beliefs and principles, and then you're working within those to find a process that works for everybody so that everybody can be effective.
Yeah.
So it's a process for effectiveness, not for necessarily giving up on what's going to make everybody angry so that we can get work done. It's
absolutely true. But there's more to Agile than just the communication piece. And I think
that's true.
I think this is something that people have lost track of. I just looked it up. I have been programming, and I still program pretty much almost daily, even though I do all this, Agile stuff as well, consulting and so forth. I've been programming for nearly 25 years. And in that time, I have yet to find anything that was as effective as extreme programming was. And the reason it was effective was not only because it had the communication aspect, but because it took a real stand on here is how software development works, and here's how it can work well. And today, when you look at some of the influential companies out there like Pivotal Labs or Menlo Innovations, they were XP companies. They were XP companies, and they still do XP. I actually think that the time is ripe for XP to make a comeback, because we've had a lot of companies that have said they want Agile and then have, of course, just paid it lip service and haven't actually changed the way they work in a way to make Agile successful. Because, of course, Agile isn't magic. The reason it works is because you change your environment to be more successful, not you impose, Scrum stand-ups and Scrums on people. That's not Agile. That's just same old stuff. Gotta keep that clean rating. Same old stuff with a different name. But what XP did, XP was founded by Kent Beck and Ron Jeffries and Ward Cunningham, three brilliant programmers. Ward Cunningham, of course, created the Wiki Web and is known for many other things as well. They understood programming first and foremost. Right. And the ideas in there, like test-driven development, which people sort of do now, although it's kind of been watered down as well, and merciless refactoring and evolutionary design, and simple design. These are some really key ideas that are fundamentally what make Agile work. If you think about Agile as being the ability to change direction according to business needs, that's the outcome. That's what you get from doing Agile. But what makes that possible? How is it possible to write code so that you can change direction every 2 weeks? Well, it has to do with how you write that code.
Yep.
And when people talk about Agile today, they completely forget that. And that's where all those good XP practices around TDD and refactoring and simple design and evolutionary design come in. And even in 2006, those were being forgotten. But I think they're completely off the radar now.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that was totally my experience as well with a couple of teams. We had one team where we actually pushed to do Agile. And then we made our boss go to an Agile conference, and he was totally on board after that. But what was interesting was, those outcomes came from us implementing some of these principles. And the other thing was that when we implemented it, we were also, like you said, talking to our stakeholders and talking amongst ourselves. And, we did have stand-ups and things like that, but that was all basically in service of having all of the other practices that we had in place to make sure that we were doing things the right way and getting the kind of feedback we need. And what was also interesting about it was that we would sit down every 2 weeks and we would have what's called an Agile retrospective, and we would talk about this is working, this isn't working. And the conclusion that I came to was that we may start at the same place with Agile, but we probably won't finish in the same place with Agile with different teams, because we are talking not just about writing the software, but we're talking about how we write the software and what that means. And we start implementing new things to adjust so that we are being more effective. And that's ultimately the goal.
Absolutely. I mean, in an Agile team, you're not only building the product, you're building the team that makes the product. Mm-hmm. And if you have an Agile team that's been going for a couple of years that looks anything like any of the other Agile teams in your company, then there's some aspect of that you're doing wrong. Now, of course, there's going to be some standards that you need to have for consistency across teams. But ultimately, your way of doing Agile should be something that's really fit for the type of work that your team does. And every team is different, even just because their personalities are different, just because they have different preferences. That's where things like mob programming came from, which is this idea that we aren't just going to work individually or work in pairs, but we're actually going to work as a whole group around a screen. Now, personally, that's not my style. I don't think I would. Mine either. I don't think I would do mob programming. But you know what? I would try it. And if I was on a team where that worked better than pairing or working individually, then yeah, absolutely, we'd do it.
Yeah, and that's really the beauty of it, is that if somebody comes up with a new idea, give it a shot. And then you can say definitively, you know what, with this group of programmers, that's not going to work. Or you can say, you know what, with this group of programmers, it's not going to work, but we all kind of gelled around this little trick that we figured out with mob programming, right? So mob programming is not for us, but we figured this thing out about it, and we've incorporated that into what we do now.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was telling the story of how I got involved with this, I heard about extreme programming. I thought, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard of.
I thought they were nuts. You pair program with each other all the time?
Yeah.
Like really all the time? Yeah, and some of the other things, it's like, okay, that might work, but these other couple of things, those people are crazy.
Yeah, but you know what? I tried it. And it did work. Yep. And so I tried it more. And the more I tried it, the more it worked. And I would say that for anybody who's looking at getting into extreme programming, which if you've only done Scrum and you're listening to this, try extreme programming because it is such a different experience. And I do know of a book that talks about how to do it well. It's mine. It's called The Art of Agile Development. And it's still relevant. This is the book I wrote 10 years ago, but it's still relevant today. But yeah, give it a try. And when you try it, don't just try it for a couple of days or a couple of weeks and say, okay, we figured it out. Because some of these ideas are really non-obvious. So if you're going to try them for real and try them for like 3 months or so. That's how long it took me to figure this out the first time I started doing extreme programming. It really took a lot of work to figure out what are the different ways. What do all these terms mean? How does this all work? Of course, I didn't have a lot of resources to go off of back in 1999, 2000. And part of it was trying out a bunch of different things and also, trying to understand what these materials meant, but also figuring out how to make it my own and make it work for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. For you, for your development practices, you need data to know what reality is. I could say this about a lot of things in reality that we're dealing with now that go look at the data, because I'll just say it, certain aspects of politics, I find that some parties are more correct, I guess, than others, but neither of them tell the whole story because they're all trying to push you to do something that is vote for them in this case, because we're right before the election in the US as we record this. But, go look at the data. Go look at what backs up what you think and go look at what doesn't back up what you think. And in this case, what I think James is telling us to do is go experiment.
Yeah, get out of your bubble. Get out of your preconceptions about, this is obviously how this should work, and and try it for real. Ron Jeffries has a great essay. It's called "We Tried Baseball and it didn't work." And it's basically it's this story, this parable about somebody trying baseball and saying, well, obviously the bases are too far apart, because how could you ever hit a ball that far? So they bring them in. They said, well, now we're having a problem with people not being able to catch the ball, so we're going to replace the bat with a slab of wood. And and they do all this stuff, and they end up with a complete, terrible thing, and it's a terrible experience. They say, well, we tried baseball and it didn't work. So if you're going to try something, don't just, and I suppose this goes for politics too, don't just listen to the people who reinforce your beliefs. Mm-hmm. But if people are saying something works for them, figure out why it works. Some things only work in context. Actually, many things only work in context. So what is that context? And I think the secret of Agile is that what we do is we change the context so that we can work in a way that's more successful, rather than changing the work to deal with a dysfunctional context.
Yep, 100%. All right, so what are you working on now?
Well, I am still working on the Agile Fluency project. That's at agilefluency.org. This is actually a set of tools for coaches and leaders in organizations to change their context, so that if they're having trouble being successful with software development, it's probably because there's organizational system constraints that are preventing them from being successful. So how can you find those constraints, and how can you gather data to convince people in a position of authority to invest in changing those? That's what the Agile Fluency project is all about.
Nice. Very cool. If people want to find you online, where do they go?
Agilefluency.org is the Agile Fluency project. I also still blog at jamesshore.com. You will find the world's ugliest website, proudly designed in 2003, still going. But all the essays I've been writing since then, the URLs have never changed. So they're all still out there, all still accessible.
Very cool. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Do you have some things you want to shout out about?
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says "Pay me now." And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the "How did you hear about us" section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the "How did you hear about us" section.
I just have one right now because I just got back from a big trip and my brain's not working as well. But I have been hearing about this tool called Nix. Have you heard of this?
Mm-mm.
Nix is fascinating. It's a package management tool, and there's a corresponding Linux-based OS called NixOS, nixos.org. And this is a purely functional operating system in that you can define the state of the operating system purely functionally, and you can change the state of the operating system, which kernel you're running and which dependencies you have, just by changing your configuration file. And it will do it in a deterministic way. So if you're on the web and you care about how you deploy, or you're doing DevOps or something like that, this is a tool that will help you have deterministic deployments of predictable state that you can run locally and you can run in the cloud or on your servers really consistently. Now, I haven't tried it myself yet, but I find the idea absolutely fascinating. So NixOS is my pick today.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. I did mention one of them earlier in the show, and that was the MFCEO podcast. Now, he's talking mainly about business, but what I find is that it really applies to a lot of areas of life, the kinds of things that he's talking about, like just taking control and taking responsibility for your life. And sure, there are going to be things that happen to you that are completely and utterly beyond your control. But ultimately, the direction your life takes is your decision. And so, sometimes other people will come in and help you out. Sometimes they won't. But the largest determining factor for where you end up is what you do and how you choose to react to the things that come your way. So I'm going to pick that just because I am really digging it. I will warn people, some folks are a little bit sensitive to cursing and certain types of language, and he definitely he's a little flamboyant as far as his vocabulary is concerned. We'll put it that way. So if that kind of thing bothers you, then just be aware. You may want to go listen to one and then decide whether or not that's your thing. If it doesn't bother you, MFCEO stands for, mother effing CEO. So, you kind of get the feel there. If that, if that language bugs you, don't listen to it. But if it doesn't bug you and you want to go learn from somebody that I think really kind of hits the nail on the head, go check it out. Yeah, I think that's about all I've got for this episode. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for coming, James.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, we'll come back next week with another My Angular Story episode.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.